Well, thank you for having me. And so many of my friends out there, so this is really fun for me. Of course, a lot of my friends I hear in there. So, and I wish not akin, it's not the same thing as public speaking, so you do all know that, right, before I start. And I'm sorry that I can't be quite as energetic as Candy, who's quite energetic there. But anyway, I wanted to start out, and because I know that many of you have very young children, you have infants, some of you toddlers, some school-age children, maybe even older. So I was hoping tonight just to be able to kind of encapsulate for you maybe what is important along each one of those areas so that you can take something away and it can be beneficial for everyone. Usually the first question we get is, when do we start speech therapy? And Joe alluded to that. From a speech therapy standpoint, we really like to say day one. And for that reason, people often look at us like, what? But it truly goes back to building that oral motor muscle tone that Joe referred to, because we feel like it is so important for both speech and feeding as the child gets older. So a consultation many times with a speech pathologist, speech therapist, same thing, can hopefully direct you in a way, give you oral motor exercises, and even perhaps help you with any feeding concerns that you might be having. Most of the infants that come to us are those where there are feeding concerns, and that's where the speech therapist can intervene. Most often that is, again, a muscle-based issue and something that we can look at and hopefully provide some muscle motor intervention for you and then help with those feeding transitions. So often it is those feeding transitions. You think about whether it be from breast to bottle, bottle to cup, from stage foods to textured foods, whatever. So often it is that transition of one food to the next. And if you think about that each one of those requires a different set of muscles, then it goes back to that whole muscle base theory, and something that a speech therapist can hopefully then help you with both the oral motor and with the feeding as well. The most important thing to remember from those little tiny ones in feeding is the main thing is to keep the mouth above the ears. And interestingly, what I think we're beginning to learn is that when children are fed in a position where the ears are down, you have a tendency to get the fluid in the ears. Then with the ear infections, you have increased difficulty with speech obviously occurring. But what happens and what we've begun to learn now is that if you think about the fluid in the ears taking up space, the tongue really doesn't have anywhere to go. So what's going to happen is the tongue's going to come forward. So if you think about ear infections taking up space, tongue coming forward, what we want to do is to reduce those ear infections, reduce that fluid in the ears, and bring that tongue back to where it needs to be. So just a little something there for those that have little ones. And then as your child gets a little bit older, the other thing, people start to think about early speech. The statistics show that the average Down syndrome child will say their first word at 18 months and start to combine words at 30 months. By combining words, that might be more milk, milk please, those kind of combinations. We really also like to include sign language. For those all of you who have been with me know that I'm a real proponent of sign language for all children. If you think about, most children can sign long before they can verbalize. So just giving them some type of communication is extremely important. Signing then increases their language, it gives them communication, and it reduces their frustration overall. So the sign language is just extremely important, we think. Also, for those who know me well too, with those toddlers, straws, I saw several drinking from straws, and I really like the straw, and straws for little ones help again bring that tongue back in the mouth. So sippy cups really don't promote good tongue carriage and really don't promote good speech. So straws are great. Speech therapists most speech therapists should have a straw hierarchy in their bag of tricks, and it's something that is a therapeutic tool. You actually teach children to drink from a variety of straws that become harder and harder and have more resistance. So you're building more muscle tone, and you're working on just bringing that tongue further back, which is what you want for both speech and for feeding. Some of the complications that we run into in the Down syndrome population, one is hearing loss. And I read statistics of 60 to 80% of Down syndrome children have hearing loss. With that said, though, that is predominantly related to ear infections, something that we all, we battle a lot. But I think it just really brings up to me, and hopefully to all of us, how important that is and how much we really need to stay on top of that. Not only from the little ones, but at each part of their life. We really need to be looking at ears, getting early ENT appointments. Hopefully, all of those children get newborn screenings, but it's recommended that even after those newborn screenings that they get reevaluated at 6 months, and just to keep on and on looking at those ears. One other complication that we run into is apraxia. And I use that term, it's not a term I often like to throw out there because people run to the internet and they look it up and they get the worst case scenario that there is out there. But all apraxia is difficulty motor coordinating speech. So it is just a motor discoordination. Child knows what they want to say, but just can't get it out. Speech therapy at that point becomes extremely critical for teaching the child strategies, for teaching the child cueing. So it's just a really, really important time for them to learn each of those steps. For a child who has apraxia, repetition, repetition, repetition is important. If you have a little one, that may mean every time you walk up those steps at your house that you're saying up, 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 and having that child repeat after you. You may be counting those steps, 1, 2, 3. It's repetition, repetition, repetition. If you have an older child, you might be working on, having them put more words together. So a strategy for an older child who's having a hard time coordinating speech might be to use the same phrase to help. Like for instance, dressing, you might be put on shirt, put on hat, put on shoes, put on socks, because you can start increasing their language by using something that's familiar and rote, and that helps. I know we're all, such a busy group, we're such a busy society, and I don't really like for my parents to feel like they have to carve out 30 minutes a day to sit and work on, you're going to sit for 30 minutes and work with this child on these flashcards or this, that, and the other. But what I think is extremely important for all children is to put those things into natural settings. If you're going on a bike ride, if you're doing a bath, things that you would normally be doing in your everyday, to be putting the speech along with it. So just keep that in mind of, taking the things that you're already doing and putting the speech in those natural settings. Your school-age children, as they get a little bit older, get into school, some of the big concerns at that point become articulation, how well people can understand them, language, how much can they say. You want them to be able, at that point, to be able to tell you what happened when they got home from school, safety. Those things are just really extremely important. Many children are getting therapy in the school, and that's extremely important too, because the school therapists are right there with the teachers. They can hopefully help the teacher with any issues. They hopefully can help with any peer and social interactions that the child needs to be working on. So the school environment and the school therapy is very, very important. Where we differ from a private standpoint is we probably take more of a medical focus. We probably take more of a muscle-based approach for both speech and feeding. Obviously, it's much more one-on-one, and in the school system, it may be in a large group, and certainly ours goes throughout the year, and in the school system, you may be getting breaks, summer breaks, spring, those kind of things. But most people, may supplement, have the school therapy and then supplement with the private as well. And older children, the other thing that I just, when we were talking about takeaways, earlier, things to take away, this was something that to me has just become really important. That we used to think that Down syndrome children, when they got into school, that their language plateaued, that there was a certain point, and they would often talk about plateau. The research now shows that Down syndrome children can make progress in their speech and language up until their 20s. So if you think about that, that is huge. And so I would just encourage you not to give up on it and to keep pushing, for that expectation. I know I speak to the choir when I talk about expectations, but because you all are great about emphasizing that and putting that out there. And I think that you have to have those high expectations for your children. And I think you need to find a therapist who shares that too. I think that is extremely important. But just know that they can make, even though we like to start young, we think you should start young, it's never too late to start. And also, now the research shows that you can make progress even up until the 20s. And I recently saw a therapist working with an 18-year-old Down syndrome child who she had, he wanted to work on getting his speech a little clearer. And what she had done was she had taken the Dragon dictation software and she had downloaded it onto his iPhone. And he thought that was the coolest thing ever because he had his iPhone and it's a speech to text. If you're familiar with that program, it's a speech to text program. And so he would practice all the time on his iPhone, seeing if he could get what he was saying right. And so it was huge. So I just want to put that out there, that there are tons of things that you can even do with your children as they get older, even as they are young adults even. So start early and continue and just keep at it is the biggest thing.